Russia is finished. Not in a decade, not in 5 years, right now. As you're watching this, the world's largest country is literally falling apart, and we mean that literally. The ground is melting, the economy is suffocating, the men are vanishing, and the birth rate? It just hit a 200-year low. We all thought Russia was this unstoppable force, a nuclear superpower, a country too big to fail. But here's what nobody's telling you. Russia is failing at everything, and it's happening faster than anyone predicted. War, economy, demographics, geography, 4 horsemen of Russia's apocalypse all hitting at once. What you're about to see isn't just bad news for Putin, it's the systematic collapse of an empire. And the West? They're about to look stronger than ever. Let's break down exactly how Russia managed to destroy itself. Remember when Russia rolled into Ukraine thinking it would be over in 3 days? That was over 1,000 days ago. Every single day since has been a disaster that's bleeding Russia dry in ways most people don't even realize. Here's the brutal math. Russia is now approaching 1 million casualties. Let that sink in. 1 million Russian soldiers killed or wounded. That's more than the entire population of San Francisco just gone. And these casualties are climbing at an astronomical rate, over 1,200 per day, according to NATO estimates. To put this in perspective, that's higher than Soviet losses in Afghanistan over their entire decade-long war. Russia is experiencing Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Chechnya combined, compressed into just 3 years. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are Russia's future fathers, engineers, doctors, the very people who were supposed to build the next generation, the skilled workers who should be innovating in tech sectors, the teachers who should be educating the next generation, the entrepreneurs who should be driving economic growth. Think about it. That's like losing an entire high school worth of young men every single day. For what? A few kilometers of Ukrainian mud? Territory that's costing more in blood than any strategic value it could possibly provide. And here's the part that should terrify Putin. The casualties aren't evenly distributed. They're hitting Russia's poorest regions the hardest. Places like Dagestan, Buryatia, and Tuva. Regions that ironically had the highest birth rates are seeing their young men disappear at rates 10 times higher than Moscow or St. Petersburg. We're talking about entire villages where every military-age male is either dead, wounded, or has fled. In some Dagestani communities, activists report more dead than the Kremlin admits for the entire country. These aren't just statistics. These are communities being demographically erased. It's demographic suicide disguised as military strategy. Now here's a twist that makes this catastrophe even more devastating. When Putin announced his partial mobilization in 2022, something unexpected happened. He called up 300,000 men to fight, but the real story isn't who answered the call, it's who ran. 700,000 Russians fled the country rather than serve. That's more than double the number who were mobilized. And these weren't cowards or draft dodgers in the traditional sense. These were Russia's best and brightest tech workers commanding 6-figure salaries, doctors with decades of experience, scientists at the cutting edge of research. Dubai alone now hosts nearly 750,000 Russian expats. Istanbul has become a second Moscow. Yerevan is flooded with Russian IT specialists. These are people who could have been building families, starting businesses, creating the innovations that keep economies competitive in the 21st century. Instead, they're building other countries' futures while Russia hemorrhages its human capital. And for those still fighting, the equipment losses are staggering beyond comprehension. Ukraine's military estimates Russia has lost nearly 11,000 tanks. That's almost as many tanks as the United States, China, and all of NATO combined currently field. We're talking about decades of military production vaporized in under 3 years. Artillery systems? Over 28,000 destroyed. Aircraft? Over 400 shot down. These aren't Cold War relics either. Many were Russia's most modern systems, irreplaceable under current sanctions. Here's where the military disaster becomes truly insurmountable, and this is something the mainstream media isn't telling you. NATO intelligence now suggests Russia can sustain these loss rates for maybe another year, 2 at most. After that, the cupboard is bare. No more pulling ancient T-62 tanks out of storage. No more cannibalizing old equipment. The Soviet inheritance that Russia has lived on for 30 years will finally be exhausted. And then what? Russia's current tank production is estimated at less than 100 units per month. At current loss rates, they're losing that many every 3 days. The math simply doesn't work. The stunning part is how this military catastrophe connects to everything else that's failing. For years, we heard the same story. Sanctions aren't working. Russia's economy is resilient. Putin found workarounds. Well, guess what? That narrative just got blown to pieces. 2025 is the year Russia's economic house of cards finally collapses. And the numbers are absolutely brutal. The ruble, it's lost a big chunk of its value against the dollar. It plunged by over 20% in 2024 alone, making it one of the worst performing emerging market currencies. Russians are watching their savings erode in real time. That vacation fund, shrinking fast. That retirement account, worth less with every passing month. The money for your children's education no longer stretches nearly as far. But currency collapse is just the visible tip of a much deeper economic iceberg. In an effort to contain inflation, Russia's central bank has just raised interest rates to 21%. 21%! For context, that's higher than most credit cards charge in the West. Imagine trying to run a business when borrowing money costs more than a fifth of the loan value every year. Imagine trying to buy a house with mortgage rates that would double your debt in under 4 years. It's economic suffocation by mathematics. If you're finding this deep dive valuable, consider hitting that subscribe button. Your support helps us continue bringing these critical global stories to light. Thanks for being part of the community. Now let's get back to Russia's economic nightmare. Let's talk about oil, Russia's golden goose. The price of Russian crude has crashed with blends like Urals and Espo dropping as low as $48.92 per barrel in early May, more than 40% below what the Kremlin had budgeted for. That's not just a price dip, it's a massive discount compared to global prices. Why? Because fewer and fewer countries are willing to touch Russian oil, even at bargain prices. India and China, Russia's last major customers, are extracting massive discounts, knowing Russia has nowhere else to sell. The sanctions that everyone said wouldn't work, well, they're finally hitting with full force. According to new analysis from the Atlantic Council, Russia faces certain recession in 2025. Their economy is expected to contract while inflation runs rampant, the dreaded stagflation that destroyed economies in the 1970s. Here's a stat that should make every Russian oligarch nervous. $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves are frozen in Western banks. That's nearly a third of $1 trillion that Russia desperately needs but can't touch. It's like having a massive savings account you can see but you can never withdraw from. Gone, just sitting there, taunting them. And the corporate exodus has been devastating. Remember all those Western companies that left Russia? McDonald's, Apple, Microsoft, thousands of others? That exodus didn't just hurt Russia's economy, it destroyed entire sectors. Tech, finance, retail, all hollowed out practically overnight. Russia lost access to critical software that runs everything from banks to airlines, semiconductor technology essential for modern manufacturing, medical equipment keeping hospitals functional, replacement parts for everything from elevators to airplanes. And here's the kicker. Russia's trying to replace Western technology with Chinese alternatives. But Chinese companies are terrified of secondary sanctions. Many are quietly pulling back, demanding payment up front, or simply refusing to deal with Russian companies altogether. The result? Russia is experiencing what economists call reverse industrialization. They're literally going backwards technologically. Modern factories sit idle without spare parts. Airlines are cannibalizing planes to keep others flying. Russian carriers have grounded over 40% of their foreign-made aircraft. It's like watching a country travel back to the 1980s in real time. Even more damaging is the brain drain effect on the economy. Those 700,000 who fled, they took with them an estimated $50 billion in capital. That's money that will never circulate in Russian businesses, never create Russian jobs, never pay Russian taxes. Yet all of this economic devastation pales compared to Russia's next crisis. If you think the war and economy are bad, wait until you hear about Russia's demographic disaster. This is the crisis that will destroy Russia even if the war ended tomorrow. Brace yourself for this. Russia just recorded fewer births in early 2025 than at any point since the early 1800s. That's Napoleonic Wars era, when people still wrote letters with quills and thought leeches were cutting-edge medicine. When Alexander I ruled the Russian Empire, when the world's first passenger railway was still a year away, when America was barely 50 years old. That's how far back you have to go to find birth rates this catastrophically low. We're not talking about a minor dip in birth rates. We're talking about demographic collapse on a scale not seen in over 2 centuries. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, births fell to just 293,000. That's a quarterly figure lower than during the worst of World War II, lower than during Stalin's famines, lower than during the chaos of the 1990s. The fertility rate? It crashed to 1.4 children per woman. You need 2.1 just to maintain your population. At current rates, each Russian generation will be 33% smaller than the last. It's a mathematical death spiral, and Putin knows it. This is the same leader who, months before invading Ukraine, admitted that demographics were his biggest nightmare. His biggest fear wasn't NATO, it wasn't sanctions, it was running out of Russians. So what does he do? He launches a war that turbocharges the very crisis he feared most. The irony would be Shakespearean if it weren't so tragic. Here's where Russian demographic policy enters the realm of dystopian fiction. The government is now so desperate to boost birth rates that they're trying everything short of mandatory breeding programs. Some regions are literally paying students to have babies, cash bonuses for pregnancy during university. They're restricting access to contraception. They're making abortion increasingly difficult. In one of the most bizarre moves, officials have proposed releasing female prisoners specifically so they can get pregnant. Think about that, a country so desperate for babies that it's considering turning prisons into maternity wards. There are even resurrected Soviet-era medals for mothers with 10 or more children, offering 1 million rubles as incentive. Who can afford to raise 10 children when inflation is destroying purchasing power and your husband might be drafted any day? Russia is treating women like baby factories while offering them no security, no stability, no future worth bringing children into. That's not policy, that's panic wearing a bureaucratic disguise. And the panic is justified because the projections are civilization ending. Russia's population is set to plummet from 146 million today to potentially 83 million by century's end. But even that might be optimistic. The UN's worst-case scenario shows Russia shrinking to just 74 million people. For a country that spans 11 time zones, that's not just decline, that's the difference between a nation and a wasteland. The regional variations make this even more catastrophic. Moscow and St. Petersburg are maintaining barely replacement-level birth rates, propped up by internal migration. But the regions? They're demographically collapsing. Some areas are seeing birth rates below 1.0 children per woman, lower than South Korea, lower than Japan, lower than any developed nation on Earth. Entire regions are aging out of existence. In parts of rural Russia, the median age is approaching 50. There are villages where the last child was born a decade ago. Schools closing not for lack of funding, but lack of students. Hospitals shuttering not from sanctions, but from lack of patients young enough to matter for the future. Yet even this demographic nightmare pales compared to what's happening to the physical country itself. Now, if you thought Russia's human disasters were bad, wait until you hear about what's happening to the land itself. Because Russia isn't just losing people, it's losing the very ground beneath its feet. And we mean that in the most literal sense possible. Across Siberia, the permafrost is melting at a rate that's shocking even climate scientists who predicted this would happen. We're talking about soil that's been frozen solid for tens of thousands of years, since before human civilization existed, suddenly turning to mud. And when permafrost melts, catastrophe follows. In Norilsk, Russia's northernmost city and crucial nickel-producing center, over 60% of buildings now show critical structural damage. Foundations that were stable for decades are suddenly shifting, walls are cracking, floors are buckling. Families are being evacuated in the middle of the night as their homes become uninhabitable death traps. Roads that were perfectly straight are now roller coasters of asphalt. Railways warp like they're made of putty. The Trans-Siberian Railway, the spine of Russia's transportation network, experienced over 30 major disruptions in 2024 alone due to permafrost melt. But here's the truly terrifying part. This affects 77% of Russian territory. We're not talking about some remote corner of Siberia. We're talking about an area larger than the entire United States and Europe combined. An area that contains most of Russia's oil and gas reserves, most of its mineral wealth, most of what makes Russia economically relevant. And it's all built on ground that's turning to mush. Russia is warming 2.5 times faster than the global average. In Siberia, the warming is nearly 4 times the global rate. This isn't gradual climate change that societies can adapt to over generations. This is geographical collapse happening in real time, measured in years, not centuries. The economic costs are staggering beyond comprehension. Russia's own government estimates that thawing permafrost will affect 44% of roads, 34% of railways, and 17% of buildings by mid-century. The projected cost? A staggering $169 billion just to keep infrastructure from sinking into the mud. And that figure could rise as warming accelerates and ground stability worsens across Siberia. And that's assuming that they have money, which they don't. The cascade effects are mind-bending. As permafrost thaws, it releases massive amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas 28 times more potent than CO2. Russia isn't just a victim of climate change, it's becoming one of its biggest accelerators. By 2030, Siberian permafrost could be releasing more greenhouse gases annually than the entire European Union produces. It's a feedback loop from hell. Warming causes melting, melting releases gases, gases cause more warming causes more melting. And then there are the craters, the stuff of science fiction becoming science fact. Massive holes are literally exploding out of the ground as trapped methane bursts free. The largest one, discovered in 2024, was 50 meters wide and 30 meters deep, big enough to swallow an entire apartment building. These aren't rare occurrences anymore. Scientists have documented over 200 such craters, with new ones appearing monthly. In summer 2024, one crater opened just 700 meters from a major gas pipeline, the kind that supplies Europe with energy. If that pipeline had ruptured, we'd be looking at an explosion visible from space and an environmental disaster that would make Deepwater Horizon look like a minor spill. But here's the cruelest irony in this geographic catastrophe. Russia should be benefiting from climate change. Longer growing seasons, new Arctic shipping routes, access to previously frozen resources. On paper, a warming world helps Russia more than almost any other country. Except their infrastructure is collapsing faster than they can adapt. The Northern Sea Route that was supposed to revolutionize global shipping and make Russia rich, shipping through Russia's prized Northern Sea Route is becoming increasingly unreliable. Unpredictable ice conditions are making navigation harder, and Russia simply doesn't have the ships to cope. Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Trutnev recently admitted that Russian shipyards can only build 16 ice-class cargo vessels by 2030, far short of the 70 needed. Putin's grand vision of Arctic dominance is melting away faster than the permafrost. Even more devastating are the human impacts. Indigenous communities that have lived in the Arctic for millennia are watching their entire way of life vanish. Reindeer migration routes that existed for thousands of years are now broken by new lakes and unstable ground. Fishing communities are finding that rivers have changed course overnight. And remember those population statistics? Well, climate catastrophe is accelerating demographic collapse. Who wants to raise a family in a city that might sink? Who wants to invest in a business when the ground beneath it isn't stable? Young people are fleeing these regions even faster than before, leaving behind the elderly and the desperate. The Siberian city of Vorkuta has become the poster child for this double catastrophe. Once home to 115,000 people, it's down to under 50,000. The government is demolishing over 100 abandoned apartment buildings because maintaining them for a shrinking population makes no sense. It's a city literally being erased from the map, building by building. Here's where Russia's story goes from bad to apocalyptic, because these aren't 4 separate crises hammering Russia independently. They're 4 parts of one massive systematic failure, each making the others exponentially worse. Think about the cascade effect. The war kills and scares away young men, devastating the demographic pyramid. Fewer young men means fewer babies being born, accelerating population decline. Fewer babies means fewer future workers to sustain the economy. Fewer workers means economic decline becomes structural, not cyclical. Economic decline means less money to maintain infrastructure across Russia's vast territory. Failing infrastructure accelerates due to permafrost melt and climate change. Climate disasters force more people to abandon huge swaths of territory. Abandoned regions mean lost resource extraction, further weakening the economy. More people leaving means fewer soldiers for Putin's war machine. The military turns to prisons and impoverished regions for recruits. This depletes the last sources of population growth, accelerating demographic collapse. Round and round it goes, a death spiral where each revolution makes the next one worse. But here's the detail that should terrify every Russian. The government is now classifying demographic data. That's right, birth rates have gotten so bad that Russia is treating population statistics like military secrets. When Rosstat stopped publishing detailed demographic data in March 2025, it wasn't to prevent enemy intelligence from learning troop strengths. It was to prevent Russians from understanding the true scale of their civilization's collapse. When a government starts hiding basic demographic information from its own people, you know the situation has moved beyond catastrophic into existential. The regional picture reveals the true horror. Some areas are seeing population drops of 40% in just a decade, faster than war zones, faster than pandemic hotspots, faster than any peacetime population collapse in recorded history. We're watching entire regions of the world's largest country simply empty out. Ghost towns are multiplying across Russia's vast expanse. Not the picturesque abandoned villages you might see in rural America or Europe, but entire cities built for tens of thousands that now house hundreds. Infrastructure built for the Soviet dream now crumbling in the Russian nightmare. In the Far East, the situation is so dire that local officials have stopped pretending Moscow can help. They're making direct deals with Chinese provinces for everything from food supplies to infrastructure support. That's not federal governance. That's the beginning of de facto autonomy born of desperation. Even Putin's inner circle is starting to crack. Leaked documents from late 2024 show Russian officials discussing scenarios that would have been treason just years ago. Administrative autonomy for eastern regions. Bureaucrats speak for accepting that Moscow can no longer govern half the country. Manage demographic consolidation, which means abandoning vast territories because there aren't enough people to hold them. The Russian Security Council is reportedly considering the previously unthinkable voluntary territorial consolidation. In plain English, giving up on governing huge chunks of Siberia and the Far East, pulling back to a smaller, more manageable European-Russian core. For a country whose entire identity is built on being the world's largest, this isn't just policy failure, it's civilizational defeat. So where does this all lead? What happens when the world's largest country by landmass can't maintain itself? The scenarios keep global strategists awake at night, and they should. First, there's the fragmentation scenario. As Moscow's control weakens, resource-rich regions might decide they're better off alone. Imagine Siberia declaring independence, taking most of Russia's oil and gas with it, or the Far East formally aligning with China rather than a weakening Moscow. Tatarstan and Bashkortostan rediscovering their independence movements. The Caucasus republics deciding that Moscow's weakness is their opportunity. It sounds far-fetched until you realize regional leaders are already bypassing Moscow to make deals directly with China. When the Primorsky Krai region signed infrastructure agreements with Chinese provinces without federal approval, it wasn't bureaucratic oversight, it was a preview of coming attractions. Second, there's the wounded bear scenario. As Putin watches his entire empire crumble, he might lash out internationally to distract from domestic collapse. A desperate nuclear power with nothing to lose? That's everyone's nightmare. We're already seeing hints of this with increasingly reckless nuclear rhetoric, threats against NATO countries, and promises of asymmetric responses to Western support for Ukraine. The danger here isn't rational calculation, it's desperation driving decisions. When your country is collapsing and your legacy is in ruins, starting a wider war might seem like the only way to change the narrative. Third, and this is what Western intelligence agencies are quietly preparing for, there's the controlled implosion scenario. Russia doesn't explode, it slowly deflates like a punctured balloon, losing influence, territory, and relevance over decades. This might be the best case, but it's still fraught with danger. Who secures the nuclear weapons in abandoned regions? Who prevents local warlords from seizing military stockpiles? Who handles the refugee crisis as millions flee collapsing regions? For the West, particularly the United States, this represents an incredible strategic opportunity wrapped in enormous danger. As Russia weakens, American influence in Europe and Asia strengthens. NATO expansion continues not through recruitment but through desperation, countries begging to join for protection. Energy markets shift permanently away from Russian suppliers, strengthening American LNG exporters and Middle Eastern allies. But here's the twist nobody in Washington is fully prepared for. China might be the biggest winner. As Russia desperately needs investment in markets, Beijing is extracting incredible concessions. Siberian resources at bargain prices, oil and gas at discounts that would make Saudi Arabia weep, military technology transfers that would have been unthinkable just years ago, even potential territorial adjustments in the Far East that would return lost Chinese lands. Putin thought he was playing three-dimensional chess with the West. Turns out he was just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while Xi Jinping quietly bought the lifeboats. The numbers tell a story of comprehensive failure that historians will study for centuries. Russia isn't facing a crisis. It's facing four existential crises simultaneously, each making the others worse: war, economy, demographics, and geography. The four pillars that should support a great power are all crumbling at once. This isn't speculation or Western propaganda. The numbers don't lie. Nearly 1 million war casualties and climbing, bleeding the country of its future. An economy crushed by 21% interest rates and a volatile currency. The lowest birth rate since Alexander I of Russia ruled, with population in terminal decline. 3/4 of the country's territory affected by climate catastrophe, with cities sinking into melting permafrost. Putin wanted to restore Russian greatness. Instead, he's presiding over the most comprehensive collapse of Russian power in history. Not since the Mongol invasions has Russia faced such total, systematic failure across every dimension of national power. And unlike 1991, there's no easy recovery this time. The Soviet Union collapsed but left behind infrastructure, population, and potential. This time, you can't rebuild when you're running out of people. You can't modernize when you're technologically isolated. You can't expand when your own territory is becoming uninhabitable. You can't project power when you can barely maintain control over your own regions. The empire that Napoleon couldn't conquer, that Hitler couldn't destroy, that survived Stalin's purges and the Soviet collapse, it's being undone by its own leaders' catastrophic miscalculations combined with forces beyond any government's control. For the West, this is vindication of a patience-based strategy. Every sanction, every weapons shipment to Ukraine, every diplomatic isolation, it's all working. Slowly but surely, the Russian threat is neutralizing itself through a combination of internal failures and external pressures. But for ordinary Russians, this is a tragedy on an epic scale. Watching your country literally fall apart while your leaders insist everything is fine. Watching your savings evaporate, your sons disappear into a meat grinder war, your city sink into the earth, your future vanish like morning mist. The babushkas who survived World War II, who rebuilt after Stalin, who endured the chaos of the 1990s, they're watching their grandchildren flee the country or die in Ukraine. The promise that their sacrifices would build a better future, it's dissolving faster than Siberian permafrost. So what do you think? Can Russia pull out of this death spiral, or are we witnessing the final chapter of the Russian Empire? Is this justice for Ukraine, or a humanitarian catastrophe in the making? Will China step in to fill the vacuum, creating a new kind of Russian vassalage? Let us know in the comments below, because one thing's certain, what happens to Russia in the next few years will reshape the entire global order. The collapse of a nuclear-armed superpower isn't a local event. It's a planetary earthquake whose aftershocks will be felt for generations. And if you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations. The geopolitical earthquakes are just beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, go watch how the Siberian curse is killing Russia.